He told me not to embarrass him. At the same party where he planned to pretend I was invisible. He said, "Wear something neutral, don't say too much, don't bring up the old stories." I smiled, nodded, listened like I always did. But my silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. So I showed up, sat quiet, let him shine, let him speak like I didn't exist. I listened to the lies dressed as praise, I smiled through the whispers, I waited, and when the moment was right, I stood. Handed him a sealed letter, and I walked away while he was still talking. He opened it in front of everyone. His boss, his colleagues, the people he wanted to impress. And I watched a man crumble, without raising my voice, without saying a single word. Have you ever been asked to shrink for someone else's image? To make yourself small just so someone else can stand a little taller? Let's talk. Because that night, I finally stopped playing along. Hello there, thank you for being here with me. If you're listening right now, I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing where my stories are reaching. It warms me more than you know. Now, let me tell you how it all began. We started with nothing but an idea. A broken down pickup truck, and a little hope. That garage behind our first house wasn't much. It leaked when it rained and baked us like bread in the summer, but it held our dreams. We laid out old blankets over oil stains, stacked boxes on borrowed shelves, and built a shipping business with our bare hands. It wasn't pretty, but it was ours. He talked to the clients, smiled big and shook hands like he had the world on a string. And while he was out shaking hands, I stayed behind, packing, labeling, balancing every penny, every sheet, every error. He became the face. I became the hands, the feet, the calculator, and the broom. I remember stitching curtains for that garage window because I wanted it to feel like something more than a workroom. I wanted it to feel like a future. While he was out chasing deals, I was learning freight codes and fixing printers we couldn't afford to replace. People looked at him and said, "He's going places." They didn't see the woman balancing books by candlelight, skipping meals to pay for ink and paper, running numbers in her head while folding laundry at midnight. But I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for applause. I was building something I thought would always be ours. I believed back then that love meant sacrifice. That partnership meant sharing the work, even if you didn't share the spotlight. I thought one day we'd both stand on that stage, side by side. But sometimes, when someone gets too comfortable in the light, they start pretending they built it alone. It's funny how success can change the way someone looks at you. Not all at once, but little by little, like dust settling where love used to live. When the business started growing, things didn't shift overnight. It was quiet, like the way a room gets colder when someone walks out and doesn't shut the door behind them. I remember the first time it happened. We were at a small investor dinner. Nothing fancy. A few folks from the city came to hear about the company's new direction. I had been up the night before, typing out the proposal myself. I sat beside him, proud and tired, waiting for him to say what we always said: "We built this." But when someone asked how it all began, he laughed and said, "Oh, I had this wild idea in my 20s, started it up with a little help from family." Family. That was the word he used for me. No name, no story, no mention of the nights I slept beside an open ledger instead of a warm bed. No sign of the woman who walked through those early storms with him. I smiled, I nodded, but I felt the sting, like I'd been erased, soft and clean, right in front of strangers. It didn't stop there. As time passed and the money grew louder, I became quieter. He stopped calling me his partner in meetings. If I spoke up, he'd give me a look, one that said, "Not now, not here." Sometimes he'd chuckle and say things like, "Let me handle the grown-up talk," or, "You wouldn't understand the corporate side, sweetheart." Not in anger, in politeness. And that made it worse. Because you can't argue with politeness. It keeps you in your seat. The truth is, I was never afraid of him yelling. I was afraid of being slowly faded out. Like a song you once danced to that now only plays faintly in the background. People started coming to the house asking for him by title: CEO, founder. I'd answer the door in the same clothes I used to wear back when I ran the numbers, but now they looked right through me. I was the woman with the lemonade tray, not the woman who built the customer base from a coffee-stained notebook. And still, I smiled. I kept the books balanced. I made sure payroll went out on time. I remembered birthdays for the staff he forgot. I sent thank you cards he never thought to write. And I did it all without a name tag, without a seat at the table, without credit. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't always come with shouting or doors slamming. Sometimes it comes with a quiet dinner where your name is left off the list, and yet you still serve the food. But I was paying attention. Every time he looked through me, I made a note. Every time he polished his image by dimming mine, I tucked that moment away. Because I knew, one day, the silence I'd kept would be the very thing that would speak loudest. He came through the door humming, coat slung over his shoulder, smile wide like a man who had just been handed the key to a kingdom. He kissed my cheek without really looking at me, and said, "Big news. Huge dinner coming up. My boss is turning 70. It's going to be the event of the year." I listened as he paced the living room, talking fast, talking big, talking about guest lists and speeches and wine selections. He named names I didn't know, mentioned titles and companies and deals like they were old friends. I stood at the edge of the room, hands still damp from washing dishes, nodding gently, listening. Then he paused, looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a while. And just like that, his whole tone shifted. "You can come," he said. "Of course you can come. Just, maybe don't wear red this time. It's a little loud. And maybe keep the conversation light. You know how you can get when you start telling those old stories. We want to keep things classy, clean, polished." He chuckled like it was harmless, like he hadn't just peeled another layer off me without even realizing it. I smiled. I always smiled. I didn't flinch. I didn't frown. I just nodded. And somewhere inside me something clicked. Not with anger, not even hurt. Just clarity. That was the moment I decided I would wear the red dress. The same one he always said was too bold for his kind of events. The one I'd folded away at the back of the closet, not because I didn't love it, but because I stopped believing I had the right to take up space. And more than that, I decided to carry something else. A letter I had written in silence. A letter I'd spent months crafting with care. Not out of spite, not to destroy, but to correct the story. A letter that told the truth, on paper with ink and proof and grace. He didn't know I had kept copies of those old contracts, that I still had the minutes from the first board meetings, that I still had the paperwork showing I owned just as much as he did, before he restructured the company behind closed doors. He didn't know I had stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting for the right room, the right time, the right silence to hand it all over. So I let him plan his party. I watched him practice his toast in the mirror. I listened to him talk about how important it was to make the right impression. And every time he rehearsed that speech, I folded that letter again, pressing down the crease just a little firmer. Because when a man is so busy polishing his own name that he forgets who carved it in the first place, sometimes you have to remind him. Not with noise, not with rage, but with a sealed envelope, and a memory he can't rewrite. The night of the party came wrapped in quiet tension. I took my time getting dressed, not out of vanity but out of purpose. That red dress hadn't touched my skin in years. It still fit. It still spoke. I slipped it on like a memory I was no longer ashamed to wear. The car ride was silent except for his occasional reminders. Just smile and follow my lead. Don't bring up anything old. Let's keep tonight simple, please. I nodded. Every time. No argument. No resistance. Just a woman with a secret, folded neatly inside her handbag. We pulled up to the venue, some fancy rooftop ballroom overlooking the city skyline. I stepped out and felt the cold air greet me like an old friend. My heels touched the pavement softly, but they made a sound that turned more than a few heads. Inside, the lights were warm, the music gentle, the kind of space where everything was designed to look effortless. People milled around, drinks in hand, conversations blending like background music. He walked ahead, greeting his boss, shaking hands with board members. I followed a few steps behind like some elegant afterthought. As I moved through the room, heads turned, not in admiration, but in calculation. I could feel it. Some looked twice. Some didn't bother looking at all. But I caught the pause in a younger woman's voice when she whispered just loud enough, "Is that his mother?" Another woman stifled a chuckle behind her glass. His coworker glanced at me, then leaned in to say, "She's dressed brave." I smiled. Not a tight smile, not a forced one. A soft, knowing smile. The kind of smile a woman wears when she's already seen the end of the story. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I found my seat near the corner of the room, right where he suggested I sit earlier. Out of the way, but still visible, just in case someone asks. I sat there and listened to the stories told across linen-covered tables, listened to the rehearsed laughs and shallow praise, listened to him retell old business victories as if no one else had ever been part of them. Not once did he glance my way. Not once did he nod in my direction or say my name in a room I helped build brick by brick. He stood up taller with every lie that left me out of the picture. But I didn't need to be loud. I didn't need to stand or shout or interrupt. I just needed to be there long enough for him to feel safe, long enough for him to believe that I had, once again, swallowed my place and accepted my seat in the corner. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the sharpest truth. And the truth? It was sitting folded in my purse, waiting. Just like me. The night before that dinner, the house was quiet. He had gone to bed early, mumbling something about needing to be well rested for the big day. I stayed up in the kitchen, lights low, the hum of the refrigerator keeping me company. I brewed a cup of tea, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something warm in my hands while I did what I came to do. The letter sat half-written for weeks, waiting in a drawer by the sewing machine. I'd started it on a Monday morning after overhearing a conversation he had on the phone, telling someone, she's not involved in the business stuff anymore, just home things now. I remember standing there, holding a towel, heart beating so steady it scared me. Not angry, just done. That night, I pulled it out, flattened the creases, and finished what I started. It was one page, no emotion, no accusations, just facts, dates, percentages, my original shares in the company, my contributions documented in the earliest contracts, and attached a signed resignation, is prepared and finalized through the board member, who still returned my calls, the one who once said to me, "You were the reason this company survived its first 2 years." His boss, the one throwing the dinner, had signed the resignation himself. I had introduced the two of them over coffee in our backyard 2 decades ago, when all 3 of us were just trying to stay afloat. That boss never forgot where it all started. He may have liked my husband's charm, but he respected my mind. And I knew that paper would remind my husband of something he'd conveniently buried. My power wasn't loud, but it was never small. While he was out buying cufflinks and memorizing names, I was on the phone with lawyers. I gathered the documents he thought I'd thrown away, the statements he assumed I never read. He'd spent so long treating me like a memory, he forgot I was a witness. I placed the letter in a cream-colored envelope. I didn't seal it just yet. I read it once more, and I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel guilt. I felt calm, like someone finally returning borrowed things. Then I sealed it. Pressed the flap down slowly with the back of a spoon, the way my mother used to seal wedding invites, and I placed it in my handbag beside my lipstick and a peppermint. He forgot who built the backbones of his business. I reminded them, but more than that, I reminded myself. I wasn't going to disappear into the background of his story. I was going to sign my own page and hand it to him at the perfect time. That letter wasn't written out of anger. It wasn't soaked in bitterness or rushed with rage. It was written with steady hands and a clear mind. Every word had weight. Every sentence was a memory brought back to life, but without apology. It started with the timeline, when we launched from that little garage with 5 boxes and 1 client. I listed the dates. The first shipment we ever sent, the first loss we took, the first year we turned a profit, all of it documented, traced back to bank slips and invoices I had kept, tucked away in a folder no one ever thought to check. I laid it out plainly, not as a threat, but as truth. Then I reminded him of the shares. Not the ones he granted me later out of ceremony, but the ones I earned when we filed for our LLC and used my retirement savings to cover the startup fees. I had proof of that wire transfer, still printed and folded, dated and initialed. He used to call it our leap of faith, but somewhere along the way he started calling it his vision. I included the original clause I helped write, the one that protected either partner from being bought out without review. He told me back then, "It's just a formality, baby." But I wasn't signing formality. I was signing protection for both of us. He just forgot I knew how to read what I signed. I listed the trademarks we filed under both our names before the logo ever hit a business card. I reminded him gently that the company email he uses today was created from my laptop while I sat in my nightgown learning how to code on a dial-up connection. I wrote about the first employee we hired, the one I trained, the one who still sends me holiday cards every year even though I haven't stepped foot in that office for a decade. I named names. I named numbers. Not to shame him, but to remind him that erasing me from the story doesn't make the truth vanish, it just delays its arrival. And at the very end of that letter, clipped neatly to the back, was the resignation paperwork. His. Drafted with care. Reviewed by legal, signed by his superior, quiet, complete, final. A soft exit, offered not with malice but with mercy. Because I didn't need him ruined. I didn't want him destroyed. I just needed the lie to stop walking around dressed like the truth. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about making a scene. It was an overdue resignation, with his name on it, and my power behind it. Power he thought had faded just because I'd stopped using it in front of him. He forgot that power doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrives folded, sealed, and timed just right. And when he opened that envelope, in front of the very people he tried to impress, all I wanted was for him to remember one thing. My name may not have been spoken in his toast, but it was printed on every page of that company's beginning. And now, it was printed on his end. The room had grown louder by then. Laughter danced between champagne glasses, and the clinking of silverware faded into soft background chatter. He stood tall at the center of it all, holding his wine glass like a trophy, the city light stretching behind him like he owned every window view in that building. People gathered closer, eager for his speech. His boss sat front and center, smiling, nodding, proud. Colleagues leaned forward, waiting to hear their names mentioned. And I sat quietly in my corner, watching him stand on a stage I helped build, preparing to give a toast that would leave out the truth once again. He tapped his glass with a spoon, the sound ringing through the room until the laughter settled into silence. He cleared his throat, smiled wide, started with the usual lines. I want to thank everyone who made tonight possible. My team, my mentors, my incredible staff. And of course, he paused for effect, eyes scanning the room until they landed briefly on me, my lovely wife. She's always been my better half, at home. The crowd chuckled politely. A few turned to smile at me. I returned it with a soft nod, calm, still. But inside, something in me stood up before my body did. Not in anger, not in shame, just in clarity. I rose from my seat slowly, letting my steps carry the weight of every moment I had stayed silent. The floor was smooth beneath me. My heels didn't rush, my heart didn't race. I walked with the same steady rhythm I used to pack boxes in that garage all those years ago. He kept speaking, not noticing at first. I walked up to the front where he stood, not touching the mic, not asking for a word. I simply reached into my handbag and pulled out the envelope. Sealed, neat, heavy with truth. He looked at me with confusion, still mid-sentence. I didn't blink. I didn't whisper. I just held it out, and he took it, hesitantly, like he already knew it wasn't an anniversary card. I turned around, just as steady as I had come, and returned to my seat for a brief moment, just long enough to see him slip his finger under the flap and pull the letter out. His voice caught, his lips moved, but no words came. He read the first line, then the second, then the signatures. And that room, so full of celebration and polished introductions, fell quiet. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations froze mid-laugh. The air shifted. Not loud, not chaotic, just still. Like someone had opened a window and let the truth blow in, soft and cold. He looked up from the letter, eyes searching for me. But I was already rising again, this time for good. Because I didn't come to interrupt his party. I came to finish my part in his story. And I did it with the same grace he tried to bury. Without raising my voice, without demanding attention, without asking permission. Just a letter. Just a name. Just a truth long overdue, finally handed back to the one who tried to forget it. He stood there holding that letter like it burned his fingers, like the paper itself weighed more than it should. His mouth opened, then closed again. The corners of his smile twitched, trying to hold form, but the color had already drained from his face. His voice, once smooth and full of control, cracked just beneath the surface. He cleared his throat once, then again, but no words came. Just air and panic. People started shifting in their seats, glancing at one another with those quiet, nervous looks. The kind folks give when something doesn't feel right, but no one wants to say it aloud. A man beside him leaned in and whispered, "Everything okay?" Someone else at a nearby table tilted their head and asked, "What's wrong?" But he didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were glued to the bottom of the page now, where the signatures sat. Black ink, bold and final, his boss's name, the board member's stamp, and beneath it all, his own printed title, "Now removed." I watched him closely from across the room, not out of vengeance, but out of stillness. The same kind of stillness I'd kept for years. The kind that listened while others spoke too long. The kind that noticed things no one thought you'd remember. He took a step back. His hand trembled as he folded the letter, trying to hide the shake in his wrist. He turned to the crowd and forced out a laugh, dry and empty, but the room didn't join him. They weren't laughing. They weren't smiling. They were watching. Watching a man who'd rehearsed every word of his speech forget how to speak. He looked at me again, eyes wider now, searching for a clue, for a lifeline, for some version of me that would rescue him like I always had in the past. But I didn't move. I just met his gaze, steady and calm, and let him see what he had tried so long to overlook. He fumbled with the microphone, mumbled something about needing a moment, and then he sat down. Not in his seat, but the nearest one he could find, like the ground had tilted, and he needed anything solid to hold on to. And that's when I rose from my chair, slowly. No need for drama, no need for attention. My heels met the floor in quiet rhythm, and I walked out with the same grace I had walked in with. No apology, no glance back, just peace. The doors behind me didn't slam, they didn't creak, they whispered closed like they too were ready for this chapter to end. I didn't leave him with anger. I didn't leave him with a scene. I left him with silence. The same silence he once asked me to keep. Only now, that silence belonged to him, and he could sit with it as long as he needed. When I got home that night, there were no fireworks in my chest, no victory song playing in my ears, just quiet. A deep, beautiful quiet that wrapped around me like an old quilt I'd nearly forgotten I owned. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel proud either. What I felt was something harder to name, something that came after you've let go of the weight you carried for too long without knowing it. I closed the door gently behind me, turned on the porch light like I always did, and slipped off my shoes by the entryway. My feet touched the floor, and I could finally feel the ground beneath me again. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't replay the scene in my head. I just walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and made myself a cup of tea. The same tea I used to drink after long nights packing boxes in our old garage. I stood at the window while the water boiled, watching the breeze move through the trees. I felt like I had returned to myself. And when I sat down on that porch, cup in hand, the night air around me felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't full of swallowed words and unsaid truths. It was light and free, just like me. I started doing little things again. The things I used to enjoy before I became background noise in someone else's success story. I picked up my old paintbrushes and let colors speak where words had once been trapped. I joined a book club at the community center where no one asked me who I came with or what I used to do. They just listened when I read aloud. I started spending time with my granddaughter again, long afternoons filled with laughter and quiet walks to the park. She'd ask me questions about life, about love, about how to know when enough is enough. And I'd answer her the way no one ever answered me, with the full truth, no sugar, no hiding. I reclaimed my house too, rearranged the furniture, donated what didn't feel like mine anymore, lit candles in the hallway again, not for guests but for myself. I started cooking meals that reminded me of who I was before the business, before the silence, before the image he asked me to keep. And the most beautiful part of it all? I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I didn't check for his name in my messages. I didn't stand by the mailbox wondering if he'd send something sweet to apologize. Because peace doesn't come in apologies. It comes in understanding that you no longer need them. I hadn't lost anything that night. I had simply returned what never truly belonged to me, the burden of keeping someone else's image clean while mine gathered dust. And as I sat out on that porch each evening, tea in hand, brushstrokes drying on canvas inside, laughter echoing from the other room, I realized something simple and sacred. Sometimes, freedom isn't loud or flashy. Sometimes it's a cup of tea, a breeze through the trees, and the sound of your own breath in a home that finally feels like yours again. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. My house, my porch, my time, they all felt full in a way they hadn't for years. I no longer woke up waiting for his voice to echo through the hallway. I no longer walked on eggshells, hoping I'd say the right thing to be seen, or the quiet thing to be ignored less. I simply woke up and began my day without his shadow trailing behind me. It was on the third morning that the first delivery came. A bouquet of lilies and soft-petaled roses, arranged just the way I used to make them for our anniversary. The note was short, neat, too neat. I should have said more. You've always been the heart of this. Forgive me. I placed the flowers on the table by the window, not because I wanted them, but because they looked pretty in the sunlight, and pretty things should never go to waste. I didn't reply. That evening, he called. The phone rang once, then twice, then 3 more times before I turned the ringer off and went back to my book. I let it ring in silence. No bitterness, just no need. Over the next week, the messages came like little waves. Not floods, but gentle tides testing the shore. I didn't know it meant that much to you. You could have just told me. You blindsided me. Each one carefully phrased like he was writing for an audience. But I wasn't one anymore. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice cracked through the machine. I miss you. 3 words. Simple, honest, maybe. But still, I didn't answer. I deleted it. Not because I was angry, and not because I wanted to hurt him. I deleted it because I no longer needed to hold space for something that took up so much room in my spirit without giving anything back. Missing someone doesn't always mean you need them. Sometimes, missing someone is a lesson, not a longing. And he needed to sit with that lesson the way I once sat with my silence. Uninterrupted, uninvited, and unforgettable. I poured another cup of tea, sat on my porch, and let the breeze carry what was left of that chapter into the trees. I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to be heard to know that I had spoken. It was a few weeks later, on a calm afternoon, the kind where the wind moves just enough to keep the air honest and the leaves whisper low. I was on my porch, same as most days, with a worn book in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. There was a kind of peace in the routine, no fanfare, no phone calls, just the kind of stillness you earn after letting go of a life that asked too much and gave too little. That's when I saw a dark car pull up across the street. Quiet, unassuming. The kind you don't notice unless you're paying attention. And after years of being overlooked, I've become very good at paying attention. The door opened, and out stepped a man I hadn't seen in years. Taller than I remembered, his hair more gray than black now. But his walk was still steady. It was his boss. The same one my husband once called a titan. The man who had taken the company from a hopeful spark to a corporate blaze. I hadn't seen him since those early meetings, back when we all shared folding chairs and stale coffee. Back when ideas mattered more than titles. He walked up my steps slowly, hands folded in front of him like he wasn't sure if he should even speak. I didn't rise. I didn't need to. I looked him in the eye, and he nodded once before he said anything. I didn't come here for him, he said. I came to thank you. He sat beside me, careful, quiet, respectful, in a way that said he knew. Knew what had happened, knew what I had done, and knew that this conversation was long overdue. That company, he began, his voice low, almost embarrassed. It had lost its soul. Somewhere between the expansion and the board meetings, between the headlines and the handshakes, it forgot who built it. He reminded us. I didn't speak. I let the moment hang there, because some truths don't need confirmation. They just need air. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. The 3 of us, him, my husband and me, standing in front of that old garage, smudged with time. But the pride in our faces was still fresh. He smiled as he handed it to me. I kept this all these years, he said. Because that day you were the only one who spoke with vision. He had ambition. You had grounding. We needed both, but somewhere along the way, only one side got the credit. He paused, looked out toward the street, then turned back to me. I won't make that mistake again. We didn't talk much after that, just sat there, two people who had seen what happens when truth is delayed, but never denied. We watched the sun lean lower in the sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I felt seen, not as someone's wife, not as someone behind the curtain, not as a helper or supporter or silent partner, but as someone who had helped build something real, and who, when the time came, refused to let it be stolen by silence. When he stood to leave, he didn't offer his card or a forced promise. He just said, "If you ever want your seat back, it's there, with your name on it." I smiled, gently. I didn't need the seat. I had my porch. I had my peace. And now, I had my place back. Not in his company, but in my own story. Fully, finally, mine. Ever been told to dim your light so someone else could shine a little more? Ever been asked to stay quiet in a room you helped build, just so they could pretend you were never part of the blueprint? It's a strange kind of hurt, being erased without being touched. Smiling through dinners where your name is spoken like an afterthought, if at all. But I've learned something. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You don't have to fight to be seen. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of quiet truth, delivered with grace and wrapped in the weight of everything they forgot you carried. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I handed him the truth, and I watched him open it with his own hands. That was the day I stopped asking for space. I simply took back what had always been mine. If you've ever been overlooked, spoken over, or made to feel small in a story you helped write, you are not alone. Tell your story below. Subscribe to Granny Stories, because this channel stays on for the ones who were told to stay quiet, stay soft, stay small, but left unforgettable.